Even as I speak, the issue of reviewing it every 10 years was rather coincidental. There is no such law anywhere that guarantees that it should be done every 10 years. What the last recommendation did was to say that it was too long. You know, the 10-year interval was too long, and then recommended that it should be 5 years. But the recommendation, which affected so many other things, was never taken and enacted into law. What was taken was simply the figures, and nothing more than that.
Did it have to be enacted into law?
If anybody says, like the Labour is saying, that it is in the law, every 5 years you have to do it, is not correct. Probably they are confusing this with a provision for a review of the pension every 5 years, or whenever there is review of salaries of workers. This is a separate issue. It's not about minimum wage.
Well, I did hear Labour talk about an agreement, I think a tripartite agreement that was reached, some time ago when the last minimum wage review was done. But are you saying that without that law, the review for minimum wage cannot be done?
Well, I have not said that. What I said is, it's not an agreement. It is the content of a report. A report is different from a collective agreement. And in any case, if it is a collective agreement, it's usually duly signed as such. But it is part of recommendation in a report by a tripartite committee set up by government to review the national minimum wage. You know how government functions. If you submit a report to government and it wants to implement it, it can do a white paper on it. It can gazette the report. Neither of this was done. But what happened was the lifting of the figures for the change, and then the amendment to the existing Minimum Wage Act. That was what happened. So it's not a collective agreement.
So the way it is now, how can the government or your commission explain this whole aspect to Labour? Because if they don't get the explanation pretty early, it just might snowball into something of sort of a conflict between the government and the union.
I did say at the beginning that Labour or union all over the world make demands. There is nothing wrong with engaging them. It's usual. Engaging them, it does not mean, the outcome cannot be premeditated or preempted. It is when you engage them, you look at the state of the economy, because the same report stated that factors that will be used in reviewing minimum wage in Nigeria will include overall economic condition of the nation, cost of living, and ability of the employers to pay, views of relevant stakeholders, and the conventions of ILO. So by the time we look at all these things, looking at the economy the way it is today, the way forward will be done. So they have a right to make a demand at any point in time. It's a usual practice. One cannot, quarrel with that at all.
I'm just wondering, if Labour doesn't make any demand, you don't think that your commission can also undertake a review of salaries and wages, considering what the times are? Do you have to wait for the demand of Labour?
This is a different thing. The thing about reviewing salaries and wages is different from reviewing national minimum wage. As I told you, national minimum wage is part of the constitutional provision that requires that the federal government should prescribe the national minimum wage. It is in the exclusive list. So it is not something the commission can deal with. But in terms of reviewing salaries, of course, it is done, salaries are reviewed through collective bargaining, because every salary that is operating in the public service today is the result of collective agreement between union and employers. So it is done through collective bargaining. It's not prescribed, whereby the commission will just sit somewhere, then quickly give it to, give an increase. It has been done in the past, of course, very distant past. But unions, if you ask them, will tell you that that is more like a lagis, is an award that is not the product of collective bargaining. They will put it aside and say, let us bargain.
Do you think that the 56,000 naira minimum wage demand by labor is realistic?
Honestly, between you and me, the issue of whether it is realistic or not cannot be said offhand. There must be certain criteria that will be put into place. As I have mentioned, listed them here today. They will interplay before you can know what is realistic or not in this country today. You will need the input of the states. You will need the input of the critical stakeholders. You will need the input of the organized private sector. You will need the input of the small-scale enterprises. You will need a study of the self-employed people. Then you will also know the ability of various state governments to pay and employers to pay before you can say it is realistic or not. So it's only when the interplay of all these factors are put together that we know what is feasible and what is not.
There have been complaints that, you know, people on the same level in different ministries earn different salaries, so that in some ministries some are better paid than others. How do you respond to this?
Well, I think the information may not be right if you are talking about the ministries. But if you are talking of the public service, yes. Would you also believe that an NPC is part of the public service? Of course it is. But an NPC, in trying to engage staff, will be competing with the likes of Chevron, Shell, and all other operators in the oil sector. It's not going to compete with the civil service. To that extent, it must pay like its competitors in that sector. In the same vein, CBN is also part of the public sector. CBN will look towards the banking sector, and to that extent, the salary pays its staff will be comparable to those found in the public banking institutions. I mean, in the banking sector. There may be a few others that are neither CBN nor an NPC that are a little bit leveraged above, like the anti-graft agencies. You know what their role is. If you want to ensure that they are not compromised in the job they do, of course, you have to ensure that they are well paid, and that is government's decision. Apart from that, most agencies are under the harmonized salary structures. And if you are within the harmonized salary structure, you receive the same thing. The only difference is the salary you pay a soldier is different from the salary you pay a policeman. It's different from the salary you pay a civil servant. But the differentials are not, you know, so markedly shown.
All right, Dr. Richard Egbule, MFR, Executive Chairman, National Salaries, Incomes and Wages Commission. Thank you for talking to us today. Well, there you go. So that's it.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, you heard him about what needs to be done before Labour and, of course, state governors can also eventually go home with whatever they agree about the minimum wage. Well, that's a wrap on the show today. We thank you all for watching and for your comments as well. We will see you tomorrow. I'm Chamberlain Oso.
Oh, thank you, and thank you for your comments as well. Maokwe Ogun.
The interesting part has to do with the misunderstanding that has to do with the 5 years period, and he says that has to do with the pensions.
Yeah.
Let's see how that plays out. Many thanks for watching. I'm Sulaiman Alede.